So I'll just give you a bit of an update on, or a rundown of how today's going to play out. First, I'd like to introduce you to our facilitator and ABIF consortium partner, Cathy Hunt, who's sitting here in the front. Cathy is one of the founding directors of Positive Solutions. Most of you will know Cathy as a cultural strategist in Brisbane who works nationally and internationally with mission-driven, not-for-profit or arts companies, and she works a lot in exploring new investment and arts financing models, and we're thrilled to have her here today as our facilitator on this discussion. Cathy will work with our panel of ABIF fund recipients who have very generously agreed to share with you their experience and their approach, and to give you some ideas and tips that might help you going forward. So I'm going to introduce the panel members, and when I introduce you, if you wouldn't mind coming up and joining us on the stage, that'd be great. So we've got Joe Thomas, who's the Creative Director of Metro Arts, who's having a really quiet week, nothing going on at all in Metro Arts world. Paul Osach, who's also having a very quiet week, co-founder and CEO of the Anywhere Theatre Festival, which opens tomorrow. He hasn't told anybody he's here, apparently. Gary Thorpe, he's the General Manager of 4MBS, Music Broadcasting Society, and manages the Silver Memories service. And Joanne Pratt, General Manager, Vulcana Women's Circus. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. Today is a special opportunity for you, as I mentioned, all of our ABIF partners are in the room, and I encourage you to use the time today to make connections with your arts colleagues, but also the partners who are here, and maybe in our post-event discussions to get some ideas going. That'd be great. So I'll just introduce our partners, and if they wouldn't mind just waving, that would be great, so we can identify you in the room. So from QT Creative Enterprise Australia, we've got Anna Rook, Mark Gostowski, Shelley Trung, and Angela Gallus, who's at the back there. From Foresters, we've got Mark Harvey. Have we got Robin Mark? No, just Mark. And obviously Cathy Hunt from Positive Solutions. There's quite a few representatives from Arts Queensland here today, and some of you, your client managers, are here, so it's great to have everyone here. Once each of the panel members have had a chance to share their approach and their ideas, we'll have a bit of a panel discussion, and Cathy will then invite questions from the floor. I'd like to encourage you to participate with that, and the people who are participating in the webcast can also post their questions. You just post it in the comment box and then press enter, and hopefully that will come through, and I've got a colleague who's going to manage that process and bring the questions through to the discussion. At the end of the event, at approximately 5:30, we'd like to invite you to stay. We've got the bar open until about 6:30, so please stay and enjoy the afternoon. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you find the session really useful. Thanks. Over to Cathy.
Thank you, Tina. And can I first of all acknowledge Tina and all the work that Tina and her team have been doing on the fund, because it's been fantastic, and it's been a learning curve for everybody. I think Stephen's telling me to talk louder. Thank you. I'll do that. I'll try very hard. Sorry, everybody on the webcast. But can I actually start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered today, the Jagera and Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge any future elders that might be in the room with us. I want to just, before I briefly go over to everybody, just say a little bit more about the history of the fund and how it actually happened, because I think it's quite important for everybody to know that, and I think it's very important from my point of view always for everybody to know it in the context of, this is not about telling arts organisations that there is going to be no more government funding and therefore you're going to have to borrow money from some other source. This is not what this fund is about. The fund came about for it was set up for two very specific reasons. But it came about because there was an opportunity of 3 or 4 years ago for Arts Queensland were thinking about, they had some money and they were thinking about putting a lump of money into business development, but they were going to use it as feasibility study money. They were going to do some feasibility studies on what arts organisations might do with their business. I'm a consultant. I do lots of feasibility studies for arts organisations in relation to where they might go with their business. And there's one fundamental flaw with that sort of study, and that is everybody is prepared to fund a feasibility study. Nobody is ever prepared to fund what comes out of a feasibility study at the end of it, i.e. the development of the project itself that is actually going to make the change. And I also know from the work that I've done, a lot of arts organisations actually don't necessarily need the money to do a feasibility study, because the ideas that arts organisations have got in their entrepreneurial thinking in their own right, they're already working on concept development all the time in terms of new ideas that they might be trying to actually get more money from people or whatever. So why are we spending money on feasibility study? Why shouldn't we look at using money to actually invest in those projects that might change and help change a business model of an arts organisation? So that's where we actually came in and said to the government, let's use your money slightly differently into a fund that will do that. But not only that, let's find a partner that will come in and use a bit of money in a way that has never been used before, i.e. in the form of a no-interest loan. Because actually there is potentially an awful lot of money out there that is not being used, that could be used in small-scale debt financing if used properly. And that's not to take away government grant money and what grant money is there for. It's to actually add more money into the system so that there was more money for organisations to use in their day-to-day work, and particularly to invest in their business development and as an asset. So there were 2 reasons behind the fund at the end of the day. One was to actually invest in business and to actually in the business of art and the organisational development of an organisation to make it stronger for the future. And the second was for organisations to try out using a very small amount of debt financing to see if within their business model they could use it work. Because if you can make it work once, you can make it work again. And therefore there's a whole new potential field of money out there that you could use to help you grow and do what it is that you want to do in the first place. So I just think it's important to actually always bear that in mind, that this is supposed to be a value add to be able to get stronger, to get more money into your business for the art, and more money that you have control over that is not tied to some particular project or program where somebody else is saying to you, I'll give you $20,000, but you have to spend it on emerging artists because that's what we're interested in at the moment, even though you might have no interest whatsoever in emerging artists as an organisation, because you're actually dealing with something completely different. You get my drift. So that was the idea. So it's been fantastic to see, particularly the 4 representatives of the 4 organisations that we have today going through that. There are actually six investments to date, but these are 4. And so I'm actually I have to, because this was the very first one, I'm going to start with Gary Thorpe, the wonderful Gary Thorpe, General Manager of 4MBS. To just talk, everybody's going to talk very briefly, around about 5 minutes, about what they've done, what their organisation is, what they've done, and why they've used ABIF in this particular way. Over to you, Gary, and I will cut you off if I have to.
Right, I'm used to it. Thank you very much, Cathy, and thanks very much to Arts Queensland for organising this and all the other partners. It's been much appreciated. 4MBS Classic FM has been around for 38 years now. We started in March 1979, and we're a community radio station. which means basically that we're not funded by the federal government as the ABC is. I hope you're enjoying the ABC. You're paying for it with your taxes, so I hope you're enjoying it. But the community sector is a very large sector in Australia. Close to 400 community radio stations in Australia now. And it's broken up into sectors, really. We're in the fine music sector, and there's only equivalents to our stations in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. So there's only about 4 of us. So it's not a huge sector, the fine music sector of community broadcasting. We exist through funds that we raise ourselves. It takes just under $1 million a year to run an FM station in a major capital city. And sometimes 900,000, sometimes 1.2 million, and quite a variation there. And it's very hard to pick from one year to the next what's going to happen with that, because, for example, 2014 was a nightmare year for us. Government changes affected us. They affected our listener demographic, which is mostly the older demographic. So in 2014, they were holding on for grim life to their savings, etc. And so our subscription income dropped. Sponsorship income dropped as well. The business community was getting a bit shaky and frightened. And the whole range, almost every line item was hit. So it really did reinforce to us the need that we had perceived a short time before when we became aware of the ABIF scheme and were accepted into it, that we needed to get a better means of ensuring that we had enough cash to survive. So we took a really close look at what we'd achieved over the last 38 years. The classical side was really very well established. It provides employment through the festivals that we run and various other things that we do. So we have a strong focus on providing employment and a strong focus on local talent. And we do that in a whole myriad of ways. And we're about the only classical music station in Australia that has that strong focus. So we looked at that and thought, with the way classical music is in today's world, there's not a huge potential for great growth, or massive growth. It's just a slow, steady, plodding approach in the classical music world. Right across the world, classical music stations attract about the same percentage of the population, no matter where you are, New York or France, anywhere, you name it, and it's pretty much the same population. So we couldn't see huge potential. We're passionate about providing the music to that population. That's what drives us. So we looked at another thing that we had created about 10 years ago now, and we became aware of the need in the community, in the aged community, to address social isolation, which can lead to depression, which is a forerunner of dementia. So what we decided to do was to provide appropriate music as a form of music therapy to the elderly in the community. No one else was really doing it, certainly not in Brisbane, and we started that just with that in mind. But over time it became really obvious that there was a bigger purpose being served here, and that was to help address in the aged community the impacts of dementia. Physical and verbal agitation, wandering, a whole range of things. And they impact hugely, severely on the quality of life of the aged, particularly if they're in an aged care home. So we started a 24-hour-a-day radio station, playing music from the 1920s through to about the 1950s. We're just starting to move into the 1960s now. It was tremendously popular in Brisbane. We transmitted to little dedicated radios. And again, we thought, this is terrific, it's doing great service. It was one of 3 radio stations. We run our classical, our digital channel, and the Silver Memories Nostalgia channel. So looking at our business model, we felt that Silver Memories was the area of our business that had the most potential for growth, mainly because everyone we knew was getting older, didn't know anyone that was getting younger, so they're all moving in to the age group that our Silver Memories service caters for. So we looked at the market, and with the help of the funding from ABIF, it just gave us a little bit of a breather to be able to focus heavily on that. And we knew we had some funds there to support it, and we did that. And the result is that Silver Memories is now national, right around the country, via satellite. And the potential market is huge. There's well over 3,000 aged care homes that potential clients, and we've also identified during the period of the ABIF funding, we were able to go out and have a look at what other markets are there, and hospitals are another market for us as well. There are thousands of those, so it's a very big market that we've opened up, and it's got huge potential for growth. So the ABIF funding was instrumental in helping us get to the point where we could even contemplate going nationally via satellite, which we thought was way beyond our reach, but it gave us the impetus and a little bit of sense of security that we'd be able to spend the time to do that, and it's proven to be very successful. And our target to set up quite a good cash flow to help support the rest of our organisation, which was our business plan for this, was basically to get a couple of hundred aged care homes out of those 3,000. So it's less than 10%, so we think that's doable. And by the end of next year we'll be there, but we've also been tapped on the shoulder by the Federal Department of Health, who have noticed what we're doing, and they've commissioned a 12-month research project on Silver Memories and its positive benefits to the aged. So we think with their help, that'll take us even further, another step further, and should really help set our organisation up so that we can continue to do what we love doing, and that's broadcasting classical music, which is why we started in the first place.
Beautiful. Brilliant. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Gary. And I think, that kind of says, is what I was talking about. We were talking about concept development, because you'd been working on that project for a number of years before, and so you knew what it took, you knew where you wanted to take it, you knew what the opportunity was, you knew what the model was and where the potential market was, and therefore you'd done the feasibility, you'd done the concept development. Great. I'm going to move to Joe, actually, next, and talk about what is happening or not happening, and particularly what is happening. And as most of you probably saw in the papers over the weekend, some exciting times ahead for Metro, which is fantastic. Tell us.
Thank you. So we are Brisbane Community Arts Centre Limited, trading as Metro Arts. We're also 38 years old, and we own a building on Edward Street in the city. We call her the Old Broad. She is quite an old building, so she was built in 1896, and was a warehouse. The building is heritage listed. It is 6 stories high, and we have a footprint out the back, which is currently very underutilised. It's mostly a car park, and it fits 6 cars. So our concept, which again had been in development for a number of years, was about how we can best utilise the space we have to feed back into our arts community. That building is held in trust for artists and for arts activity. We run a coffee shop there. We sell 300 cups of coffee a day, and that money goes back to artists and to arts activity. So we thought, well, if we could sell more coffee, if we could sell some food, if we could create our own food, if we could start to build a little arts precinct in the middle of the city, what could we do with that money to feed it back into a tired old building and to keep regenerating arts activity in the heart of the city? So our proposal to ABIF, which is very exciting because it just went to council as a development application a couple of days ago, is we are redeveloping our foyer area, which is at street level on Edward Street. We're knocking a bit of a hole in a wall there, which Heritage seem to be okay with. And we're opening up, we have a heritage listed carriageway, so the horses and carriages used to go down there around the back to unload. So that's a private laneway. We do work in with council sometimes on their laneways projects, but it's usually locked off with a big heritage listed gate. So we're going to open the gate, we're going to knock a hole in the wall so that people can come in off the street, they can buy a drink, they can buy a ticket to a movie, they can look at the art, they can go and see a show, they can wander into the carriageway, wander out the back, and out the back we're levelling and we're putting in a number of small pods with more food and beverage, a small area for live music and other live performance. And this gives us again the option for people to come out there, they buy a ticket to the live theatre show, into that, come out, buy some more food, over into the movies, come out, buy something else, go up, look at our exhibition of live work. So that's, the short of the proposal. We are really hopeful that council will approve this. It is a bit of a change in our use of the space, obviously, but we think it's a really smart business model for Metro Arts to continue trying to utilise that space we have to work in with the Edward Street renovation that Brisbane City Council is pushing. That is very much about activation, it's about food and entertainment, and it's about heritage buildings. So we tick all three of those boxes and we're right there in the right place.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jo, and congratulations on the development application. I think I also at this stage probably need to acknowledge Gough Whitlam, because that's the reason these two organisations are both 38 years old. But that's actually what Gough did. I think that's worth pointing out on Jo's proposal, on the Metro proposal. I mean, one of the areas that interested us in terms of the innovation, I think, around that, when we saw the application, was not just that it was about creating more food and beverage. It was actually creating more food and beverage and more spaces for arts and artists to be engaged and employed. And I think that's the same with technical innovations or whatever these innovations are doing. The innovation is within the changing this business model of these organisations, but similar to not just Metro, but thinking about Umbrella, I think we have Umbrella listening in. Umbrella Arts was with their technical development of their website, was the impact both on the organisation and on the artists that they support in relation to the artists being able to make more income as a result of that. So it had a bit of a double whammy, and I think that's an important thing there that maybe we can talk about. Paul.
Yes, let's. Thank you, Cathy, and thank you everybody for coming along today and for inviting me to talk as well. I'm Paul. I'm the co-founder of Anywhere Theatre Festival. In fact, I should have a slight apology in connection to this project. I co-founded the festival with Alex McTavish, and a lot of this project has actually really been, led by her. But she is also an actor and a shy, retiring type, and we pulled straws, and I'm here, so I've got to apologise for that. Now, we created the company all around this idea that we thought the whole art of storytelling was being lost, that we were basically outsourcing it. As individuals, as communities, we're losing the ability to tell stories. This whole thing of sitting around a campfire. And that's, to TV, to theatres, wherever. And so we wanted to create something that really put the focus back onto that and created these enabled anybody really to put on performances, whether that's theatre, poetry, dance, music, whatever, and to be able to do that anywhere. And we found the best way to do that, and the easiest way to do that, was to actually exclude all the theatres from the process altogether. My feet are slightly sulphur smelling at the moment as I walk in here. So that was the basic idea, and we found that there were a lot of, initially, when we floated the idea, a lot of performers that were really interested in this idea, because they said, look, I've got this great idea, it doesn't quite fit in a theatre, or I really only need 40 or 50 people, and it's not going to work if I put it in a 200 or 500 seat theatre. But they didn't have a way to do it. They'd say, well, gosh, if I put something on in an alley, how am I going to ticket it? What's going to happen with public liability? All these things. So we basically worked out what the 3 key things were, and it really was running the box office, building up a critical mass, and insurance issues. And we said, well, we'll solve those 3, and now you just come and perform in our festival. And we did that because we thought the festival would actually be the best way of creating a critical mass. We actually have within our business plan, we're only 7 years old, within our 20-year business plan, we basically have a goal that the festival will not exist anymore. And the reason being that we feel that by the time we get to 20 years, that this whole idea of, and the ability to be able to present work anywhere will be so accepted and so easy to do that there'll no longer be a need to highlight it with a festival in May, running 4th to 21st of May throughout Queensland. We obviously had this plan looking 20 years in the future, and whilst we were looking at ways that we could grow what we were doing without unnecessarily just growing the festival for the sake of growing it and becoming another Melbourne Fringe or Edinburgh Fringe, the ABIF came up, and what it really made us sort of tap into as part of our existing business plan was we were sitting there and going, okay, right, what we'd really like to do is we'd really like to be able to set up a mechanism that makes it really easy for performers to link up with non-traditional spaces. And I know in the startup world, it's always where they compare 2 things together, and I'd say, yeah, it's basically like Airbnb except in the performing arts. And we thought, look, if we could create that kind of system, something that really enabled us in many ways to just get out of the way and allow business owners, councils, people who have a deck that they'd like to have a performance on, to be able to directly connect up with performers, that would be the easiest way to make this whole concept of performance anywhere happen. So yes, when ABIF came along, we went, okay, right, this is the right time to try and push this little project along. And that was what we used as the seed, because we found every year, the first few years, we were really wanting to do this and make it something that was happening year long. But obviously, we'd requested funding to do a festival for those 3 weeks in May, and every time we tried to sort of reach beyond that, we just found we didn't have the resources to make it happen. So that's what this fund enabled us to do. And we're also really interested in the structure of it, that it was a different process to the usual knowing what the funding guidelines are really clearly, and getting the money at the start, quitting it at the end. We liked the way that it was structured, that it was split between being a no interest loan and the grant component, and that we really did have to work on our business model and on the way that we were going to actually make the money back, and make this something that was really going to work. Because we'd had lots of sessions over a lot of red wine, we're thinking about how we'd really like this to work, but actually spending the time to really nut that out was what this whole project really allowed to happen. And we're at the point at the moment where we're beta testing this system. We've got the festival on at the moment. We're using that as a way to beta test it, and then launch it more broadly through the rest of the year. So that's where we're at fundamentally.
Beautiful. Thanks, Paul. That's brilliant. You've obviously got innovation running through your blood anyway. That's what the whole innovation is, what you do in relation to the nature of the festival that you produce. But I think what's really interesting, and I think it's probably come from everybody, is that what ABIF has done, and has been a great byproduct of it, has been the ability to really explore your finances and explore your business model in a way that you have never done before. And I think that is probably one of the big learnings for everybody, is the way you think about money in your business when you're talking to a funder, as opposed to the way money really works in your business on a day-to-day basis, is not something that we are very comfortable talking about. But what ABIF does is actually enable organisations to really get down to grips with how are we really going? Let's get some truth into where we really sit and what we could be really changing here. I know, that's good. Joe?
It's a nice segue. Set me up beautifully. I've been at Vulcana for 12 months, and I'll kind of give a little backstory because I think it's really relevant to why we decided to apply for an ABIF grant / loan. When I was looking for employment not in the music industry, I saw part-time first, so I thought perfect, and then I saw social enterprise. I thought that's really interesting. So we don't have a specific project per se or initiative. It's all about our business model, our ABIF project. And it really was about, the social enterprise talk attracted me to the job. I had a conversation with the then general manager and asked them to send me 3 years of finances before I applied. And went through the patterns of the organisation and went, this is really interesting. Because I didn't apply for the money, I can tell you that. But I was really, really interested in the model. And so after going through the finances, got the job and then spent another 4 months going through the finances in a little bit more detail. And the history, and of course Vulcana were one of the organisations that lost their funding, and then had gone through this period where they literally went from, we've got core funding, to we hate government and we're not going to take any funding from government at all. And they're the devil. So, and we're a social enterprise. And that was really good because they had to change the way, so if you don't know, Vulcana has a workshop program which basically is what feeds the rest of the organisation, and we have an artistic program, and the idea of a social enterprise, we've adopted the term cultural enterprise now, is that whatever surplus we make here goes into the artistic program. But the reality is, if we sacked Celia and didn't have an artistic program, yes, the business was sustainable, but we're not an arts organisation anymore, we're a circus school. So the reality was that on the surface it looked successful, and we had half of our annual turnover in reserves, which was great because it positioned us to be able to, and they'd been growing over that period since they'd lost the funding. But it positioned us to be able to have the money to invest in a 50-50 sort of arrangement. But we had part-time staff who are working more hours than they're getting paid. The salaries are pretty crap, and there was, I think, very, very close to reaching a tipping point where the business was going to start going backwards, because with the capacity that the organisation had, we could no longer sustain the growth that was needed to move forward. And in actual fact, we weren't making enough surplus to put back into artistic programs. So last year we had 8% government funding, and that was a Brisbane City Council project grant. So, which, when we do our annual report, looks really impressive. We had 8% government funding, we had about 11% philanthropy, and the rest of it is money we made ourselves, it is impressive, but we needed to look at the model and long-term sustainability, and so I probably spent 6 months working on to some of my staff it looked like I spent 6 months writing a funding application. It's like, Joe's still writing that funding application. But it wasn't. It was a process of really analysing the finances, understanding that the way we were reporting didn't allow us to actually segment out the different aspects that could make us money and really understand what was and what wasn't making money. And we had no business plan or strategic plan. So, because we're kind of anti-plans at Vulcana. So it was a really interesting 12 months of tipping everything on its head and really seriously looking at our capacity and our long-term sustainability and going, yes, we're in a really strong position, but we need to be in a stronger position. and we probably could have some government funding in that mix as well. So, you know, it's not that bad. So never wanting to be beholden on government, you know, that's a very core to the values of Vulcana, that we'll never be in a position where if we don't get funding, it puts the organisation in jeopardy. But absolutely maximising the wonderful things we're doing and applying for funding to supplement the creative content and pay Celia. Sorry. Our ABIF money, and it was a big decision and a lot of conversation at board meetings about whether we wanted to give up 50 grand of our reserves to match the $50,000 that we were going to get through the ABIF and then be in debt for 25 of that. But when we looked at the modelling that we could do, so our project really is about our business model, and it's about growing our capacity to earn income, but also looking at philanthropy and also looking at how we may attract some government funding, arts funding specifically, to look at touring and our reach geographically. So, and we only got the money in January, so at the moment all I'm doing is finances.
Wonderful, thanks, Jo. And I think that was a really interesting proposal because it was almost back to front. It was an organisation that had gone from having an awful lot of government money to trying to really do everything by themselves and the majority on earned income alone. And that in itself was not a sustainable model. So in effect, what Vulcana were doing, they'd been at both ends of the spectrum and realised that actually for a successful cultural enterprise, the diversity of funding and financing is a really important part of your model that is required for the future. And the more diverse your income sources, the stronger you are in relation to overall sustainability. So that's why it was a good one. But fantastic. I'm going to kick off this question because you mentioned something right at the end there, Jo, that nobody has mentioned. And that is, how on earth do you get something like this through your board? We're talking about debt financing, we're talking about taking a loan, and we know from obviously the comments that have come in, some of the first comments that people have made is, my board are never going to stand for that. So I think it would be good I'd love to have that conversation with all of you just very quickly as to how you did that and how you brought that change about immediately at a board level, because for an ABIF fund, for investment from the ABIF fund, the board's involvement and the board's sign-off is absolutely crucial.
6 pages of financial spreadsheets, with lots and lots and lots of detail. Literally it came down to the dollars. It came down to how would I guarantee to the board that we were going to make the money to be able to pay? How was this initiative, this investment? Because we're giving up, you know, a big chunk of our reserves, and by the end of our 3-year project period, I think we'll double the reserves. So I had to do some really serious modelling that made sense, and that was, you know, based on actual capacity to prove to them that it was, you know, a good investment and a good risk.
Paul?
I think there's a short answer and a long answer to this one. And I might just do the long one just because I think it was quite a big thing for us, and I know talking to other people it also is a big one. Even though we're a very young organisation, we actually had a very tumultuous time trying to assemble and build our board in the first few years of the festival. We were trying to act a lot bigger than we really were, so we were trying to do that with the board as well. And so we, instead of taking little steps and growing things organically, we just kind of went, okay, right, let's just grab 10 people and put them in a room and do it that way. It had the result that I think you think it would have, and it didn't really work very well. But what that then did is it really made it very clear to us how important it was to then rebuild the board again with real clarity on what was already our existing 20-year plan. So we were taking it back to the very beginning where we were saying, right, when we wanted to get a new board member on, and Doug Brimblecombe, who's been the chair of the board since we started the festival, was instrumental in making this happen. And what did is we spent an inordinate amount of time actually not just sending the strategic documents over to a potential board member, but actually having about 6 or 7 sessions with new board members that were coming on, as well as then letting them come into one board meeting and see how they relate to everybody. And the reason why I say all this is because what that enabled us to do is after a couple of years of going through that, we felt we had, we were in a position where we knew the board understood where we wanted to go, and also, most importantly, was very clear on what their responsibilities were. So that they knew, yes, fundamentally it was about making sure we're providing, that they're providing good governance, and that they're also asking us, the tough questions, whilst not being too embedded to, their personal, hobby projects, because that's, not what their contribution is about. So that was really the big thing for us. And then once we had that, we found with this project we already had the modelling. It was just a matter of going, look, this is how much money we're looking to borrow. This is our projections for the next year, the next few years. And just having to get past that step of being able to actually borrow money, because that was something we weren't set up to do initially. But then once we made that little, I think it was a little paragraph change to the Constitution, and checked that with what everybody else was doing, then all of a sudden it was quite easy to make that next step. But I can't underestimate how important it was to make sure that we had the right board in place beforehand, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened, and I probably wouldn't be running the company at the moment.
Joe, Gary, do you have anything else to add to that in relation to board experience in that sense?
Yes, very quickly, I just convinced the treasurer, and he did the rest.
All right. So find an ally on the board first to do your work for you, I think. Is that, Gary? Right, okay.
I think too, for us, we had been through that whole process of 6-year Australia Council funding applications, which became 4-year Australia Council funding applications, 4-year Arts Queensland applications, and they're very big applications, and we rewrote our whole strategic plan. And the board have been very brave because we shifted our model to contemporary art only. You cannot make money on contemporary art. I keep telling them this. A live art durational project with no ticket sales, you can't make money. But I actually think our board has been really brave. We got the 100,000, so the 50 and the 50 from ABIF. So we are taking out a loan. And then we went in and went, hey, we also need to raise $250,000 for a new elevator. What do you think? Great, let's do that. So we have a lot of capital works actually going on at Metro, and I think our chair, being an entrepreneur himself, is very good at encouraging the rest of the board along with that. And it is storytelling. You tell the story well, have the business case, have the treasurer on board, and it's there.
Yep. I'm going to open it up a minute for questions, but I think there's one. I mean, I always say when people are coming to me and talking about how I'm panicking about the debt finance bit, and depending on how much people are thinking about borrowing, I always refer people back to the Quick Start Fund, which gives $5,000 loans to individual artists, and say, well, with my experience of that fund over the last God knows how many years, and the capacity for individual artists to repay $5,000 over a year, don't tell me that a small non-profit can't afford to repay $10,000, $20,000 over a couple of years. It's not actually a huge thing. It's actually almost a mental thing that we've got about debt and what it does and the way it works. In fact, actually, the government said it today, didn't they? Yesterday, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And it is actually part of that. It's what it's being used for, how it's being used, and making sure you can use it in the right way. Just want Gary very quickly to tell an interesting thing happened, I think, obviously with Silver Memories, and that's the one that's been going longest, really. And the other panic that people tend to have about the scheme is, well, what if suddenly, halfway through the project, all the rest of my funding gets cut? Or I lose a major contract? And I just thought, given this has happened to Gary, I think it would be good to explain how he's come out of it.
Yes, well, we were going along swimmingly with the project, and then the federal government decided to change the funding model for aged care. Huge change, threw the whole industry into turmoil. No one really knew what the effects were going to be, and the end result was they just stopped spending. They stopped committing to anything that would require some recurring expenditure, and our Silver Memories service is funded by subscriptions from the aged care homes to pay for the access fees, satellite, and etc., and all the staff. So we had a period of about 6 months when none of them were signing up. So we'd been going along swimmingly on target that we'd set out, and then suddenly we just hit a brick wall. Nothing we did would change because they were all frightened that the federal government changes were going to adversely affect them. And it's only just in the last week or two that the money started to flow again because they're getting their head around the changes that the federal government had. So that was potentially going to be disastrous for us, but we hung on knowing that they would soon understand what the changes were. There was a need for our service, so we just clung to that hope, really, that the worth of the service would be recognised, and it's really started to pick up again, so great sigh of relief. But it meant that the staff that I had working on that and the access fees for the satellite service and the equipment that we buy to install the service into aged care homes all around Australia, we had to look elsewhere, into our accounts for funding for that and cut back on some other areas. We felt the worst thing we could do would be to panic and throw the whole thing over. And 6 months is a long time.
Yep.
A long time, I can tell you. But we hung on knowing that we had a real fervent belief in the value of what we're doing, and that held us in good stead.
But also I would suggest you also had a business model whereby you were sensible enough to ensure that if there was a hiatus in terms of where the market was going and the speed at which the market was going, you had the capacity to survive, and you'd actually built that into the whole thing.
Yeah, we actually didn't build 6 months in, but anyway, it was a very long time. But anyway, I'm pleased to say it's now back on track and we're surviving, so yes.
Wonderful. Okay, can I open it up to you guys and say, are there any specific questions that you've got for anybody on the panel, or just general questions that you have about the program as a whole that might be directed to...
Can I just say something about Arts
Please.
Queensland to
Say something
Tina
about Arts Queensland,
in
Jo.
particular? It's actually quite a daunting process, this application. It's a lot of work, but the Arts Queensland staff and I work with were fantastic and made it doable. And I think that's something that you can hang on to a little bit. Is Arts Queensland, they've got their head around this, they know how it works, and they gave a lot of guidance and assistance in pulling that together for us. So.
Thanks,
Right.
Jo.
So, any specific questions from anybody? To anybody who's thinking of putting something in, or an area of conversation that you'd like us to continue with?
It's probably more, Tina, for you and Cathy. Do you ever think that there will be a fund like this and a model like this that would be open to non-organisations that are arts infrastructure businesses like record labels, venues, all that kind of stuff that need support to support the artists that they support? Do you think, is that on the cards for Arts Queensland to do something like that?
Do you mean companies that work sort of with arts?
That work with artists, emerging artists, like,
Yeah.
for instance, like record label.
Sure. I mean, the Arts Business Innovation Fund is not just about traditional theatre or dance or music organisations at all. In fact, it's more to do with businesses that work in the arts industry. And so the main criteria, to be honest, is that you have to have DGR status, so deductible gift recipient status. And that's a requirement because our partner is the Tim Fairfax Family Foundation, and they can legally only loan funds to a DGR. So that is a bit tricky for some companies, and particularly new companies like collectives and companies that are only just starting out. But you know, the majority of companies have got to that point, because obviously to attract almost any philanthropic investment nationally, you have to have DGR. It's just, you just have to.
But I think the answer is that yes, this is a model that's being tried, and I think certainly I know there are conversations happening in Creative Victoria about a similar model that they are thinking of, but quite specifically for creative businesses. And I think that what we're trying to get from this is let's see how this goes, and if it does work, then it opens it up for exactly what you're talking about, and for other partners to come in and say, look, this can work if we can prove it, that actually helping people use different forms of financing can work. Let's try other models.
One thing I will say on that too is that this is an opportunity today to get feedback like that from the sector. And so we're at the end going to invite people to provide us that feedback. We've got a bit of a survey to send out, and this is an opportunity for you to sort of feed that back to us. So that's fantastic. Yep.
And all it would take would be finding another partner to come into it. Could be a corporate partner, could be, what business are you in, music? Okay, all right. 10 individual musicians who made their money now, wish they'd have had this when they were starting, to put some money on the table as a loan into this, that they will leave there for 3 years to help emerging musicians or small creative businesses. There you go, take that one away.
Just one sec, we've got an online question. Have you got a mic? Yeah.
We've got a question from Roseanne. I think it's similar to the previous one. Can this funding be available for a creative agency that is incorporated with a developed creative youth program?
DGR status?
Yeah, DGR status, as long as that's in place. I don't see any reason why not. And I would encourage anyone who's got an idea or a business that they want to talk about the opportunity to get in touch, and we can look at it and give some advice. I mean, it's a two-step process too, so it's worth noting that the first step is fairly, well, I think it's low-key. The others might not agree, but the first step is fairly quick, and you can get quick feedback and very detailed feedback. So that's important to note too. It's quite different to other grant funding programs in that you tend to sort of put a fairly lengthy submission in and then cross your fingers and you might not hear for quite a while. This is a bit different. This is 2 steps, so you get a chance to get some feedback that will inform what your business case then becomes. So that, I think that's, so touch base on that, yep.
And I think also it's worth thinking about who's here on the panel today. We've got the cross art form, and the innovation that's happened is across technical innovation, physical innovation, program innovation. So it's not fitting one specific type of change. It's been fascinating for us to see that it's different, it's scale, art form, nature of the change and what people are trying to do. And I think it's really crucial, and that certainly all the ones that have come through so far and the ones that have gone to this stage and been successful, these are absolutely specific to mission, absolutely clear. So you don't go out and you write a new business plan and say, right, okay, I'm going to jump through this hoop now because this is available. This is actually really trying to find something that is absolutely clear on mission. I mean, when you talk, Paul, about getting rid of the organisation in 20 years' time or whatever, the technical innovation that you've made is absolutely that, to get rid of your organisation. So I think that was just so clearly how innovation can be on mission.
Actually, sorry, can I just add one other thing around DGR? I mean, for people that haven't done it, before we did it as an organisation, we started the process of a couple of years in, and we had spoken to other organisations who had said it was a painstaking process that took 2 years. Now, I don't know if things changed around the time that we were doing it, but we found it was just some reasonably simple paperwork that just required your constitution. You had to have a couple of specific clauses in there. Obviously, you've got to have a board and responsible people on that board that are recognised as responsible people, and then send it off and wait a few months. If you've heard that DGR applying for it is really difficult, don't get put off by it. If that's where you want your business to go and you want to be able to do this kind of thing, it's not quite as difficult as it's made out.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Anything else? Anybody else wanting to make comment or say why they came here today? And
Hello, Michelle Brown. I came to, I think, what was one of the first sessions upstairs in my former employer, but I just wanted to comment and give some feedback that today has been really great to actually see some end results, or see some participants in the application process, because I think it did blow a few minds when it first started of what we could do with this and what our organisations could get out of it. But now it's so much clearer, I think, today, and where I'm at. And I just wanted to say, Gary, you should mention winning an award for your Silver Memories. You guys won an award for that, so good job.
Yes, we won an award. It was really good. Thank you, Michelle.
Congratulations, Gary, on your award. You're absolutely right. And I mean, did any of us know what we're doing? What we were doing? Probably not. We had a bit of a clue as to where we were trying to go, and surely we needed to change things in some way. But you've also got to remember that when ABIF was launched 2.5, it was like a few weeks before the I've even forgotten his name, the Minister Brandis's announcement. And so everybody, and that was the absolute clear thing that came. You can't. If you're going to create change, you can't have change happening all around you. There's got to be some stability around to allow that change to happen. So as soon as that happened, it was quite clear that there was going to be a blip in relation to the timing of people getting to think about. And I remember talking to Australia Council colleagues and to a lot of organisations, getting to the point where everybody was saying, we don't care what happens, we don't care whether at the end of the day whether we're in the 4-year funding cohort or not, we just need to know where we stand in order to plan the rest of what it is that we're doing. Now, that in itself is a really big issue if you think about it, because what that's really saying is who controls us? Who controls who we are? If we can't control our destiny because we are so dependent on the whim of a minister or whatever, and to be honest, that is absolutely nothing to do with whether the government should fund the arts or not. It's to do with the systems in which we operate in. So if you actually, what we were trying to do was, change the paradigm, but change it progressively and in a way that would help organisations rather than having the rug pulled under you as happens. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's just taken time to get it going. And the fact that it's not a programme with specific closing dates and the money's not about to disappear unless there's something happening that I don't know about, it's there and it's ready for you to spend the time working on the proposals and the applications. And I think there are plenty of people now around who've been through the process that are prepared to spend time with people and try and help that happen.
Yeah, we also work, as I mentioned before, we work very closely with clients, and one of the things that we can do is provide feedback on draft ideas and modelling, including the financial modelling, and we have a business analyst in Arts Queensland who works with us, who can also provide some feedback on the modelling. I mean, when we saw, I was thinking of Joe's submission, and that was clearly a huge amount of work in terms of all of that work, the financial modelling. But you could see the assumptions that had been made behind each of the figures. It was really clear, and I think that was the work that you'd put into developing that the financial modelling, which was fantastic.
And you'd also hooked us up with, because marketing is obviously a big part to grow our business. It's about marketing. We weren't marketing at all. It's word of mouth. Yeah. And so you provided a link to a marketing expert from another organisation, and we had some conversations that also fed into the process. But yeah, it was a really thorough process. It was a great process. Even if we hadn't pressed send at the end of the day, it was a really valuable process for the organisation to do anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I found Arts Queensland and all the people involved as partners were really helpful. We were going into an unknown, completely unknown. No one had done this before, into this market. It was a totally new venture for us as an organisation, but also for the aged care industry as well. So the figures that we had to put forward had to be very credible. So it was very helpful, the feedback we got back from the various people involved in the process at your end.
One of the things that I would add to that too is, in a sense, a traditional grant application is fairly speculative in that you're putting forward an idea of something that you think you might like to create or do. But in this is business modelling, and it's very different. So it was really, to a degree, it put a bit of pressure back on the applicants to actually stand by their figures and say, well, no, actually, that's how we came up with that. So we're not looking for speculation, we're actually looking for fairly detailed modelling. Which I don't want that to sound scary, because we can support you in that.
Okay.
Was there another question?
Was there a question? There was a question at the back, was there? No, sorry. What would you... Was there one? Sorry.
It was actually a question for Joe. Your application must have taken considerable work and needed a lot of approvals and things going on in different stages with a lot of different government bodies and so on. I was just wondering how you went about timing all of these things coming together so that you could make your application. At what point were you sure that this concept was ready to go to ABIF for expression of interest and so on?
Yes. We did spend a lot of time with Tina. Poor Tina got so many emails and phone calls from me. But it was very much about trying to get all of our ducks lined up. And for us, it was about heritage consultants, food and beverage consultants. We have been working with, it was originally Michael Rayner as an architect, and he gave us a lot of in-kind support. And Jasper Brown is another architect who was actually in our building as a tenant, and he gave us a lot of support. So we're working with both of the architects. We were doing lots of drawings. We then had to get a consultant in to look at particular heritage elements of the building as well. We had a meeting with Brisbane City Council around particularly heritage and state heritage group. Who knew there were so many heritage groups? But yes, it has been a big process, and I don't know, did it take 8 months maybe for us, something like that? And I think I would add too, what was interesting for us was we did the initial EOI, yes, go ahead. We wrote quite a big application. The panel came back with more questions. We wrote another application in response to that. The panel came back with more questions, and at each of these stages we would go out and get more information, talk to more consultants. And finally we actually went in and did almost a Shark Tank pitch, which actually would have been nice to do a bit earlier for people to really understand our concepts and show them drawings, but it was a very big application and a big process.
Absolutely.
And it's still going on because the DA has, I just got an email before I came up here saying the DA has been accepted by council.
Whoa!
Yes.
Well done.
And now we're waiting for them to come back with more questions.
Yes. I don't know, and I would add two things to that. From the panel's point of view, we wished as well because we realised, I mean, we've got to remember that this is a new thing, and we realised that we should have had that conversation, and a lot of things would have been cleared up within that. But I think also, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, did we not agree take an in principle agreement so that Joe and the board felt were happy to go to the next stage of getting things done, knowing that that money was sitting there if it would all happen, rather than you having to get everything up in, you know, the way, the sequencing. So the application to ABIF was tracking along the same time as all the others. One came in slightly before the other, and an in-principle agreement was given until all this could happen, which it now has.
Yeah, and I mean, we were also lucky because our bank gave us an in-principle agreement to support us. So
Yep.
Everyone is kind of giving us those, they're all sitting there, and then hopefully it's all going to come together at the right time.
Good.
All 287 pages of it, was that?
Yeah, I've never done a development application before. They're really big.
Okay, so that's one thing that actually the question I was going to go on to is that's one thing we probably all would have done differently. The having the opportunity to have a conversation. What else would you all have done differently now if you were going for an ABIF thing again, which you can do? People, you can come back again if there's a new great idea. There's nothing stopping that. What would you do differently?
I actually, maybe because we're kind of the most recent recipient, found the process really quite easy to navigate. So, and yeah, we were really clear with the conversations. We had great conversations. We had great feedback. We didn't get a lot of feedback, so we'd worked so closely with Arts Queensland and had a really clear understanding because of the feedback they were giving us that I don't think we got a lot of questions back from the panel when we submitted.
And I think that absolutely shows
that
you were later in the process.
Yeah, and we thought a lot about this before
and that it
we
was
went
a good
down.
proposal.
Yeah.
We're learning too.
Yeah. So yeah, wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, look, I mean, once again, we found the process was great and asked a lot of questions. It was, I think, really, if we did it again, we probably would have, or even going forward, actually been more ambitious and actually applied for more money. No, I think with, particularly with the project that we're doing, we know we can, we could deliver what we said we're going to deliver, and we'd worked out what the budget was for it. But even now, having not got to the end of that yet, looking back at it, we're going, actually, look, we really should have aimed. Yeah. I think we could have even aimed higher than that and been able to make, a bigger impact. Yeah. The process might have taken longer to get that supporting funds in there, but that would be our main thing.
We were very early, I think, in the process. Were we the first or second? First, yeah. We were very focused. We knew what we needed to get. So we basically just stuck to that and took on board feedback and the questions and used that to fashion our application. So we were actually quite happy with the process. And we didn't realise that we were the first. So
didn't tell you.
Might have been more worried if we knew. But I think staying really focused on why you're asking for the money and what you're wanting to achieve with it really helped us feel that the process was working in our favour, working for us. Yeah, very happy with it.
Yeah, I think for us it really was about being able to pitch. And I think we talked about this at some point afterwards, that if we'd brought the panel to Metro and walked them through, that would have made a big difference earlier on too, for understanding, to go, this is the wall that's coming down, this is the buildings that we're renovating, this is where we're putting these things. Visuals, I find, in this instance in particular, would have been really helpful.
Yep, absolutely. Do we have any more questions online? No? Can I ask if any of the other partners in the programme want to add something possibly to what you've heard from the panel and the applicants that have gone through, to what you really want to emphasise for people thinking about putting an application in the future?
Yeah, I think it's been a really great conversation this afternoon. It's Susanna Rook from CEA. I think one of the things just to emphasise is part of the feedback loop is, for sure, we're obviously going to be looking at the financial model, but we are really kind of interested in the business model. So the feedback spans everything from kind of technology, organisation structure, resources, marketing plans, PR strategy. So please don't think that the whole focus is on the finances. Of course, that's important when you're looking for a loan component. But in a way, you're getting the opportunity to have 360-degree feedback on your idea. And people, all the partners that are involved are all specialists in their own area. So we all have complementary skills to bring to the table. So it's a really great chance to get feedback across a number of business ideas that you might have, or your business plan in its entirety. So think broad, think big, and use this as an opportunity to really take forward your organisation to the next level.
And Mark, is there anything that you would add to that?
Mark from Foresters. I just about danced in my chair then when Paul said he would come back for more and bigger and better things. To me, that's the aim of the game. We're here to help you guys to get where you want to go. If ABIF or whatever is a small step to do something, and then that develops into something else, by all means, come back. That's the whole thing, to get you guys sustainable, if you like, and a bit of financial literacy and the business plan. Even if it's not us, I don't know if Tina wants me to say, but if it's not us and you go back to your bank because you are now sustainable, or you have some financial literacy, that you can develop a bigger and better plan. You've got go forward. You've got some runs on the board with your business plan and your repayment capacity. Even though it's no interest, you've still got to stick to a repayment plan and pay the damn thing off. If you can do that and prove to your bank that you can do that, as Metro did in part, to say that there was some expression of interest from two parties to say that we'll support if you support. It was a bit of a gun to the head sort of thing. If you do it, we'll do it. No, if you do it, we'll do it. But yeah, to me, looking forward to coming back and have another crack, that proves you've made steps forward, and that's what we're all about, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
And remembering also that it's not necessarily steps forward to be able to get more loan financing in the future, but you're already talking about certainly two developments here are likely to be increase in government partnerships in the future because of the nature of the development. It might not be arts funding in the same way, but it's still actually creating a new income stream for the organisation. If there's one thing, I'll finish off if there's no more questions. I mean, one thing that you'd all go just very quickly across all of you. One thing that you'd like to say to everybody is that and don't forget to. And the most important thing is, or whatever it might be, that you want to say to anybody thinking about putting something in.
I think what the process does is make you think about what you really need. So I think just sit down and think, what would really help us, and then put it in, and you'll get instant feedback, pretty much like waste of time or yes, let's talk. So just really focus on what your organisation really wants to achieve. In our day-to-day lives running our organisations, it's so easy to get sidetracked, but this process really made us sit down and say, what do we need to make this thing work? So I think just think about your organisation, not get too distracted, and stay focused on it. Yeah.
I think probably ask for the help that you need as well. So it is there from Arts Queensland, but also from the partner organisations, and that is quite invaluable feedback and input from such a great brains trust.
Yeah, look, I'd say, talked about the fact that there's two clear stages in the application process, and the first one with the expression of interest is something that I think it's worthwhile. You think you've got an idea that fits within the the company mission, or even is a bit slightly left or right of centre, take the time to do a one-pager and chuck it in and see what kind of feedback you get. It might not go anywhere, but it might help you to actually realise what you can and can't actually do.
Yeah, I think don't be frightened by the loan component, because I think if you are looking at business growth, and that's part of the capacity development that you undertake, but also I think just reiterate about have a crack at it, and I think it's just a really good exercise to think about your funding model and sustainability and because we're in a good position because we've got something that's very tangible that we can sell, but a lot of arts organisations don't necessarily do that sort of stuff, but I think creatively about how you can innovate.
Beautiful, and that's what I would say. That absolutely that in terms of you think creatively every day about your art and what you're doing, and this is an opportunity to think creatively about your future business model and the way that you're going. And put it in, and we'll put the one pager in, and we'll tell you if we think it may or may not fly, and tell the truth. And just have that conversation. There's nothing to hide. You're not going to get penalised. This is about actually having a really grown-up conversation about what the organisations need to look like to survive into the future. So, thank you. And if there's no more questions or no more questions online, then can we open the bar early, Tina? No.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Was there any other questions from the floor? Anyone else want to ask any questions while we're here? And we sort of would like to invite you to stay and mingle and talk to other people, and hopefully use the opportunity that we've got everyone in the room to ask some more questions and float some ideas and all of that. So please hang around if you can for a little bit longer. And also my colleague Toma is going to harass you to fill out a survey, and if you don't do it today, we'll email you, and then we'll email you again. So just do it today while you're here.
I've just got a question which may be on the mind of everyone, but what's the capacity of the pool of money for more projects?
Well, there's money.
Projects, or?
There's money. There was initially a $1 million fund, half, grant, half loan. So, and we've had 6 investments to date. So, yeah.
It's absolutely fine, don't worry, but don't leave it too long.
The unique thing too is that obviously the loan funds get repaid, which regenerates the loan component that's available. So in a way it is a regenerative sort of fund. So
and if that happens and we run out of the grant component, but we're still getting the loan component, and everybody's saying, but yes, this works, that gives us the argument to go back to government. If Tim Fairfax Foundation is keeping its money on the table, which just sits there, we can go back to government and say, right, match this, or we might go to somebody else and say, right, match this. That could be a good way of doing it, and find other partners to come into the picture, which we would like to do, if it works. And that's the whole point, and the whole point of this was to actually try and work out if this does work, and if it is taking organisations forward. That we're not going to do it if it doesn't, but I get a sense that we're almost getting there with the model in relation to getting it to work. Well, Gary won an award, so and it was all to do with the fund.
It was an international award too.
Okay.
International Dementia Awards. We're the only entrant from outside of the UK, and they had 4,000 entries, so we were really pleased.
Amazing.
And,
That's all right. Beautiful. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Arts Queensland.
Thank you.
And everybody.
Thank you so much to our panellists. That's really, really generous, and I know everyone's just so busy, so we really appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you.